If you are watching this video, I assume that this isn't your first attempt to quit yet, and you've probably been on YouTube before searching for ways to quit porn before. And when you did this, you've probably noticed that there's already a lot of content on quitting porn already out there. And this content can typically be divided into 6 different categories. Now, the first one is the method where people say that you need to set up barriers and filters in order to quit porn. They give you this advice to delete social media and install all these porn blockers because they believe that these are the things that trigger all these urges to watch porn, like seeing half-naked women dance online, for example. And if you don't have these urges, you won't get tempted to watch porn anymore, and then you're able to quit successfully. Then next up, we have the method where people say that you need to use discipline and willpower in order to quit. They say that you need to use these things like determination and discipline, like David Goggins, in order to quit porn, because they say that porn is like this constant battle that you're in, and you need to stay strong and you need to stay disciplined and you need to stay focused in order to not give in to these urges. Then next up, we have the method where people say that you need to guilt trip yourself into quitting the addiction. This is by doing things like calling yourself a loser or punishing yourself by saying things like, I need to do 100 push-ups if I relapse, because these people believe that if you punish yourself and you're being very strict on yourself, then it will become easier to quit because you literally just guilt tripped yourself into not watching porn in that way. Then next up, we have these videos where people try to educate you on all the downsides of watching porn and that you need to focus on these downsides in order to quit. So they tell you all these things like, if you watch porn, you will get erectile dysfunction, you will get low energy levels, you will get no interest from women, etc., etc. And if you focus on these downsides, you will be able to scare yourself into quitting, because the next time you feel like watching porn, you will just think to yourself, oh no, I can't watch porn because then I will get erectile dysfunction and I don't want that, so I'm not going to watch porn anymore. And then there are also these videos, of course, which go the other way around by focusing on the benefits of quitting porn, which are things like having more interest from women and having better health and having higher energy levels. And they say to you that if you focus on the benefits of quitting porn, you will be able to also motivate yourself into quitting, because you would think to yourself, if I don't watch porn, I will gain all these benefits, and therefore it's easier to resist those urges. And then last of all, we have the methods where people say that you need to set very big goals in your lives if you want to quit porn, because if you have all these big goals like earning 10K a month, dating all these 9s and 10s, or having this like dream physique, then you will be so motivated to quit, because you would be thinking to yourself, if I watch porn, I can't reach those goals because I will have low energy levels and stuff like that, and I won't be able to reach those goals. So if you set these very high goals for yourself, you will be so motivated to finally quit porn that it will become very easy to stay away from it. Now, when you look at all of these methods together, which I'm now going to refer to as the YouTube methods, you could probably say that this is decent advice. This advice has probably really helped you to reduce your consumption by a lot. You've gained some more awareness of why porn is bad for you, and you've gained some more motivation to quit, which means that you relapse less often and you're able to stay away from it more often. Because at least that's what these methods did for me. Because whenever I was in my teens, I remember I had this period where I fapped every day. And that was because I didn't have any awareness of why porn was bad for me and stuff like that. So whenever I got into the no-fap rabbit hole on YouTube and watched all these videos on all these methods I just mentioned, I was able to reduce my consumption by a lot, and I would relapse only once a month, so to say. And when I look at it this way, I could say that this is great. I made a lot of progress. I'm only fapping once a month right now. So, that's already a lot of progress here. But the thing is that the reason why this is decent advice and not great advice is because it only partially solved the problem for me. Because when you look at the facts here, you can see that whether I was fapping every day or only once a month, in both cases, I was still addicted, and I was still suffering from all the downsides that the addiction gave me. I remember, I was still worrying about I'm still addicted to porn, and I'm not really sure whether I'm able to fully quit ever in my life. I was always thinking to myself, I haven't really relapsed in a while now. Maybe I haven't watched porn for over 2 weeks now, but there's probably going to be a time in the near future where I do eventually relapse, because that's how it always went for me. And, so, in that way, I never really felt like I was fully free from the addiction. So even though I went into the nofap rabbit hole on YouTube and I used the methods which I just mentioned to you, I was never able to get fully rid of the addiction altogether. And you're probably facing a very similar struggle right now, because or else you wouldn't be watching this video right now. So that's why in this video, I'm going to give you something different today. A method that is completely different than any of the methods I just described to you, because this method actually works. And it's called the easy peasy way to quit porn. I remember discovering this method almost 2 years ago, and when I first learned about it and started implementing it, I just knew with 100% certainty that I would never ever get back to the addiction ever again. Whereas with the YouTube methods, I would always deep down still have a desire to watch porn and therefore need a lot of willpower in order to stay away from it, which would eventually lead to like occasional relapses every now and then. By using the easy peasy way, I would have no desire for porn anymore, and therefore needing no willpower in order to stay away from it anymore, and therefore able to quit permanently. So if you've tried out the conventional methods I just talked about and they also didn't work for you, but you're finally ready to try something different and finally have this feeling where you're 100% certain that you're never gonna come back to the addiction ever again, then please guys, pay close attention and watch the video in the order that it was put in. So yes, that means no skipping through the chapters, guys. I know that it's a very tempting thing to do because it's a very long video, but what you gotta understand is that overcoming addiction is like unlocking a safety lock, because just like when unlocking a safety lock, where you have to put the numbers in the right order in order to unlock it, if you want to get rid of an addiction, you have to watch the chapters of this video in the right order as well, or else you won't be able to get rid of it. So, now, without further ado, let's get right into it. So to start things off, we first of all need to understand how porn addiction works. And in order to do that, we need to break the addiction into two parts, which is the physical side and the psychological side. And to make things a little bit more fun and also easier to understand for you guys, I'm going to refer to these as the little monster and the big monster. So let's start off with the little monster here, which represents the physical side of the addiction. Now this part of the addiction has a lot to do with dopamine here. When we take a look at a graph here where you can see how your dopamine levels are at the time, we can see that when you first started watching porn, you experienced this so-called peak. You got this like peak in dopamine, and at this moment, this is where the little monster was born inside of you. Because now suddenly there's this little monster in you that is like aware that, you know, this peak exists, that you are able to have a lot of dopamine while watching porn. And suddenly there's like this little monster that says, you know, I like this peak and I want to have it more often. But what happens after this peak is that you go into a so-called crash, of course, because that's what really happens when you get a peak in dopamine. Then after that, you will go into a crash. So what happens then is that, you know, when you have this crash, the little monster will start to get hungry again. It will start to tell you like, feed me, feed me, feed me. Try to convince you to start watching porn again, because now it is aware of being able to get that high and it wants to reach it more often. So it will convince you to watch again, which can often lead to a second session. And then after that, you will have another peak again and then another crash again. And then of course, the cycle will keep going like that. And whenever the little monster starts nagging to you and telling you that you have to feed it again, this can best be described as like somewhat of a physical sensation inside of your body where you kind of have this empty feeling inside of you. There's just this slight empty feeling which you feel uneasy about, and you feel like you need to fill it up with something, you know? If you've tried quitting porn before, you've probably noticed before that whenever you get like an urge to watch it again, you would somewhat get like an empty feeling inside of your chest or stomach or something like that. So these are basically like the dopamine cravings. And then the second part of the addiction is called the big monster, which represents the psychological side of the addiction here. Now, this side of the addiction has a lot to do with the positive association that you have around porn, which is based on like beliefs and mental patterns that you have around porn. For example, when you started watching porn more regularly, you would start to create these beliefs around it, which go like, porn makes me feel good, or porn helps me to relax and sleep better, or porn helps me to cope with tough situation. And these beliefs are basically the reason why you haven't quit yet, because the big monster here, still believes that there are some benefits to watching porn, and therefore it can convince you to keep watching in this case. If we take a look again at the dopamine timeline here, we can also see that whenever you reach this peak where the little monster was born, there's also the big monster that was born here, because when you reach that peak, you would, for example, start to gain this belief that porn makes me feel good because you just reached the peak in dopamine and therefore you feel good. And then when you go into a crash and you eventually watch again, then that belief is reinforced again, because once again, you reinforce the belief that porn makes you feel good because you just attained a new high again. And the more you start doing this, the more these beliefs and these positive associations with porn will start to get ingrained inside of you. So basically, if you keep watching porn, you start programming your brain that porn is a solution to a problem that you're facing, like whether that's feeling stressed or tired, or you just want to relax for a little bit, whatever that may be. And the thing with these monsters is that both of them work together and create this so-called cycle of addiction, which goes as follows. First of all, there is a trigger to watch porn, which can be things like feeling stressed or tired or bored or alone, or maybe you see half-naked women dancing on social media, for example, like that. You get triggered to watch porn. And then what happens then is that you go to the little monster inside of you, which will pick up on this trigger, and it starts to nag you and starts to create this empty feeling. It's like, I want more dopamine, and it creates this nagging empty feeling inside of you that's a little bit annoying to deal with. And then what happens next is that the big monster will notice these cravings of the little monster and starts to think about, what should I do with these cravings? And what happens then is that you start fighting against the big monster. And what this fight means is that inside of your head, there are two parts of you. There is the addicted part of your brain that is like the big monster that believes that porn is good and you should keep watching porn. And there's also the side of you that is aware of the downsides of porn, like the part of your brain that isn't addicted. And that's basically who you really are. And you believe that porn is bad and you have all these reasons to quit. So you basically start arguing with each other, like whether you should watch it or not. Now, the argument inside of your head could, for example, go like this, where the big monster is telling you things like, you are stressed out, porn will help you relax. But then you are like, no, I really want to quit. It's not good for me. Then the big monster again goes like, come on, just one last time won't hurt. You deserve a break. Then you're like, maybe, but I don't want to fall back into the same cycle again. And if you've tried quitting porn before in the past, then having conversations like these probably sound very familiar to you, because this is basically what happens all the time when you try to resist the urges to watch porn. And the winner of this battle is eventually decided by whoever is able to last longer in this discussion. And how long you're able to last in the discussion is based on the amount of HP that you have. And HP works as follows here. First of all, there is your HP, so the part of you that is aware that porn is bad and wants to quit. And your HP is based on all of your reasons and all the tools that you use to quit. So things like willpower and discipline, and focusing on the benefits that you gain from quitting porn, focusing on the downsides that you will gain from if you continue to watch porn. So basically the things you learned by using the methods I described at the start of this video. And then the big monster's HP here is based on the reasons to continue to watch. So basically, like I just said, the positive association that it has with porn. So things like porn gives you pleasure, or porn helps you cope, or porn will help you with boredom. So for example, before you started your so-called no-fap journey and you weren't aware of porn being bad for you yet, and you weren't trying to quit yet, you didn't have a lot of HP because you didn't have all these reasons to quit. So then, the big monster, it won very easily against you because it simply had more HP. It would just always easily win the fight, which meant that you were very addicted to porn at that time. But then what might have happened is that after NoFap, when you started to increase your HP by using these things like willpower and learning about the downsides of porn, etc., you started to increase your HP. And then what you've probably noticed is that you started to win the fight against the big monster more often, which led you to relapsing less often. So this is exactly why, since you've watched these NoFap videos on YouTube, you've probably had these moments in your life where you were able to quit for weeks or months at a time. Now, when we bring back the overview of the cycle of addiction here, we can see that after the fight against the big monster, there are two possible outcomes. The first one is that you win against the big monster and you don't relapse. And the second one is that the big monster wins in this case and you do actually relapse. And when you look at this overview, you would probably think to yourself, Well, Cappie, that sounds simple. If I just focus on increasing my HP, then the big monster will never win against me anymore and I will never watch porn anymore. But unfortunately, it's not really that simple, guys, because what you have to understand is that the battle against the big monster is very unfair. And there's two reasons for that. The first one is that the battle never stops. So that means that whether you're on day 1 of quitting, day 2, day 100, or even day 1000 of quitting, you will always have to fight against the big monster over and over again. And the second one is that the HP of you and the big monster work differently. When it comes to you, you will notice that your HP will start to decrease after every fight. And why is that? Well, because your HP is based on these things like willpower and logical reasoning, which you use to quit. And the problem with that is that both of these are finite resources. Because when you look at willpower, you can see that there will be days in your life where you're feeling a little bit tired, you're feeling a little bit stressed. You won't have as much willpower anymore in order to stay away from the addiction. And when it comes to your logical reasoning, that's also something that will decrease over time. Because eventually what's going to happen is that the big monster will get smarter and smarter, will start to poke through your reasoning. Because whenever you tell the big monster something like, oh, I don't want to watch porn because I don't want to suffer from the downsides of porn, like erectile dysfunction or something like that, then what the big monster could say is, oh well, you're not planning to have sex anytime soon anyway, so you might as well just watch it one more day and you can always quit tomorrow. And when we look at the HP of the big monster here, we can see that his HP recharges after every fight, which means that every fight he will start with full HP. And the reason for that is because his HP is of course based on all the positive associations that it has with porn. And these are so deeply rooted inside of you. Like if you continue to watch porn over and over again, and you've done that for maybe like 10 years or so, then the belief that porn makes you feel good is very deeply rooted inside of you. And as long as you don't do anything about those beliefs and you don't dismantle them, then they will always stay there, and which means that they will always be there trying to convince you to start watching porn again. So when we look at an example here, we can see that whenever you have like the first fight against the big monster and you have a lot of HP, then you will be able to successfully win against it. And then on the second day, when you have a little bit less HP, but still more than a big monster, you will also win. Then on the third day, you will have like, about even HP and you're barely able to beat the big monster. And then on the last fight, you will be drained so much, your willpower is drained, your logical reasoning is drained. And eventually the big monster will win against you. So this explains why you might have had these periods in your life where you were able to quit for weeks or months at a time, but still each time see yourself falling back into the addiction once more and unable to break free permanently. And then when we look at the cycle again, we can see that whenever you relapse, you will start to feed the little monster again, so it will stay alive. And then whenever you get like a trigger to watch porn, it will signal that trigger to the little monster. The little monster will keep triggering the big monster, and because the big monster's fight will go on infinitely, there will always be a time where the big monster will win, which means that this cycle will go on endlessly and you will stay stuck in the addiction endlessly. But of course, you don't have to worry, because today we're going to fix that problem for you, and in the next chapter I will describe how we're going to do that. So now that we know how this infinite cycle of addiction works, we're now going to look for a way to break it and make sure that you never have to fall back into it again. Whenever you try to break a cycle, you need to find a spot that whenever you break it, it will make sure that the whole cycle will stop. There's of course a couple of different options we have here. First of all, there's the trigger to watch porn. Second of all, there's the little monster part of the addiction, so the physical cravings. And last of all, there's the big monster part, which are like the mental cravings, so to say. So first, let's try and see what will happen when we try to get rid of all the triggers in this case. So what you can do here is things like installing porn blockers, deleting social media, maybe getting into like healthy activities like going to the gym, for example. Because by doing these, you will try to think less about porn and get less tempted to watch it anymore. But the problem with these things is that it doesn't really work that way. Because even though you try to remove as many triggers from your life as possible, there will always still be triggers, because there will always be days where you're still feeling tired, you're still feeling bored, or still feeling a little bit stressed, and you can't really get rid of these triggers. Like maybe, for example, you start walking outside and you see a very attractive looking woman walking on the street, and suddenly you get triggered, you start thinking about sex and you suddenly get this craving to watch porn again. Like, there's not really a solution to fully get rid of all the triggers here. So this is not a very good option to do. The next up, what we can try to do is break the cycle at the little monster part of the addiction. And to be honest, this is actually very easy to do. Because once again, the little monster is only like the dopamine cravings that you have to watch porn. And this can very easily be dismantled by simply not watching porn for like a couple of weeks, so to say. Because then after a couple of weeks, your dopamine levels will have returned to its normal state. You won't have these cravings anymore. You're able to get rid of the little monster. However, while this might seem like an effective approach at first, it doesn't really work that way. And that's for various reasons. Because first of all, if you're a very heavy addict, you're very heavily addicted to porn, restraining from it for like a couple of weeks might sound way too intimidating for you to try. And you might not even be able to get to this point where you're not able to watch porn for a couple of weeks, so to say. And second of all, even if you do manage to do that, there will always still be the big monster part of the problem in this case. Even if you have successfully killed the little monster and you haven't watched porn for a couple of weeks. Because what you have to understand when we look at the cycle again is that although it does seem like the big monster is like getting signals from the little monster and it's triggering the big monster to like get into the argument and start convincing you to watch porn again, the big monster is actually not dependent on the little monster. Because even if the little monster would be killed and there would be no physical cravings anymore, whenever you get like the trigger to watch porn, like step 1, it would just go immediately to the big monster part of the problem because there would still be these mental cravings that you have to deal with. Because whenever you get triggered, there's still a big monster inside of you that says, oh, I want to watch porn. And porn is nice, porn is pleasurable, porn helps me to cope with things. So, I'm going to convince you to keep watching again. And this also explains why some of you who have been able to get on NoFap for a couple of weeks and you were able to get rid of like the dopamine cravings inside of you, you still ended up relapsing because the big monster is way more powerful than the little monster. That's why it's also called the big monster, because it's way more powerful. So that means that there's only one way left to break this cycle, and that is to kill the big monster. And in order to do that, we need to understand completely how it works so we can see how we can dismantle it. The big monster, of course, has all these like mental beliefs that create a positive association around porn. Things like porn is a way to have fun and pleasure, porn helps me with my boredom, porn helps me to cope with tough situations, etc. And when we look at the root cause of all these beliefs, we can see that there is one single root cause, and that is fear. The big monster has a lot of fear when it comes to quitting porn because it believes that whenever you try to quit porn, it will lose out on all these benefits which I just mentioned. So if, for example, your big monster has the belief that porn is a way to have fun and pleasure, then whenever you try to quit, he will say to you, please keep watching, or else life will be way more dull and you will be missing out on pleasure. And if, for example, your big monster is convinced that porn helps you cope with boredom or with tough situation, then he might say to you, please keep watching, or else you won't be able to handle these negative emotions anymore. And this feeling of fear that the big monster is giving you whenever you try to quit can be so huge and overwhelming for you that it can completely dismantle all your willpower and logical reasoning that you have to quit. So in order to get rid of this problem permanently, we need to get rid of this fear by getting rid of all these beliefs. And in order to get rid of these beliefs, we have to take a look at the source of these beliefs, which is the so-called brainwashing. What you have to understand is that the porn industry, together with society in general, has created a set of false beliefs around porn and therefore brainwashed you into thinking that porn is a good thing to have in your life and keeps you stuck in the cycle of addiction. A lot of these I already just mentioned in this video, so I'm not going to repeat them, but all these aspects of the brainwashing can be divided in like the following 7 different categories. And what I'm going to do is in the next chapter, simply going to go over all of these 7 categories and dismantle them one by one in order to make sure that the big monster will be killed and you're able to get rid of the addiction permanently. To start things off, we're going to start with dismantling the belief that porn provides pleasure and comfort. This is the belief that porn offers real happiness and enjoyment and that it can be used as a way to reward yourself in life. So whenever you try to quit, the big monster will give you these fearful thoughts that, if you quit, life won't be as enjoyable and pleasurable anymore as it used to be. Now, this is actually one of the most common misconceptions that people have about porn, because in reality, porn doesn't give you any pleasure, and I'll explain why. When we take a quick look back at the dopamine graph which I showed you before, we can see that when you started watching porn, so you got your first session, you first of all started to get a lot of pleasure, you got this very pleasurable experience, you got a lot of dopamine, but then shortly after that you went into this crash where you started feeling worse than you actually felt before watching porn. And at this point you feel a lot of discomfort and you also have a lot of cravings to watch porn again. And this is what I already mentioned, the little and the big monsters doing here. Then after the cravings, you go into a second session because you want to fix this problem, and then you get the pleasure again, then you get another crash again, and the cycle keeps going like that. But the interesting thing about this is actually that before you started watching porn, so before the first session, the very first session, you actually had very normal dopamine levels, and there was not actually anything wrong in your life at that stage. Because as we can see in the graph, it's actually after porn and after finishing the first session, you go into this crash, you actually feel worse than you felt before the session. So when we view the situation in this way, it's actually very weird to say that porn is providing us with pleasure, so to say, because when we compare the situation before and after, you actually felt better before watching porn. And because you keep watching porn over and over again, you're essentially creating these new crashes for yourself over and over again, making you feel worse and worse and worse over time. And of course, the little and the big monster, they think that porn is the solution to this problem. They think that if you're in a crash, you need to watch porn because you're able to get out of the crash, because you're able to get pleasure. But what the little and the big monster don't know is that porn is actually causing the crash in the first place. So what happens is that you're in this cycle where you continue to create a problem for yourself over and over again, then temporarily solving it by watching porn over and over again. But what you believe is the solution to the problem is actually causing the problem in the first place. So the thing with porn is that it doesn't really provide you with any pleasure and comfort, but instead it creates the discomfort and the cravings to watch even more porn. Because all that porn is essentially doing is temporarily solving a problem that was created by porn in the first place. And let me repeat that for you. All that porn is doing is temporarily solving a problem that was created by watching porn in the first place. If, for example, we would take a look at a person who would try to deliberately hold his breath for a very long time just so he could feel the relief of breathing again after a while, you would think that person is a little stupid. But essentially the same thing happens when you watch porn, because there's no discomfort in the first place. You create discomfort by watching porn, and then you feel the relief of satisfying an urge that was created by watching porn. You're just creating problems for yourself and then solving them to gain some sense of relief or pleasure. This is also known as illusory pleasure. And to be honest, this isn't serving your life in any way. So instead of watching porn to gain a sense of pleasure and comfort in your life, what you actually need to do is to simply stop watching, because only then will your dopamine levels return to their natural state again, which they were already at before you started watching. You are able to enjoy everyday life activities again in your life. So now let's move on to the second way in which people can be brainwashed here, which is the belief that porn is a necessary coping mechanism. Now this is the belief that porn is able to help you managing things like stress and anxiety, boredom, loneliness, and all stuff like that. And the big monster believes that when you stop watching porn, you won't be able to handle all these negative emotions anymore in your life. So it will then give you all these fearful thoughts and convince you to continue watching. This belief, however, is yet another misconception that people have about porn, because not only does porn not help you cope with anything, it actually makes the problem worse. And in order to explain that, let's look at a scenario where we have person A who doesn't watch porn and person B who does watch porn. When person A is facing a tough situation in his life, so something like stress, boredom, or loneliness, for example, he will feel the need to do something about it. And whenever he feels this need, he will probably do something like exercising or meditation, or maybe like a hobby or an activity that he can practice. Because he knows that once he does these things, he will actually fix the problem in this case. And he's building emotional resilience over time because he's coping with the problem in a healthy way and therefore actually fixing the problem. When person B, however, is facing a tough situation in his life and he starts to think about what he should do about the situation, he will pick a different option, because what he's going to do is he's going to watch porn, because by watching porn, he gains a temporary relief and a temporary sense of pleasure that can mask the problem and mask the situation and the negative emotions that he's facing right now. But what he doesn't know, and what he only realizes later, is that after this temporary relief, the problems still exist in his life and he still has to find a way to cope with these problems. So while person A is using healthy coping mechanisms to tackle his negative emotions and therefore making the problems smaller and smaller, person B is not only keeping the problems intact because he's only watching porn and not really solving the problem, but he's also adding new problems to his life, because now he also has to deal with the shame and the guilt that he feels because he's addicted to watching porn. And because he's adding all these negative emotions to it and he's making the problem even worse, he's actually feeling worse off than he felt before watching porn. So then what happens is that he will continue to look for some sense of pleasure and comfort. And what will he do then? You've guessed it, he will watch porn again. If you truly want to cope with the difficulties of life, you have to understand that you're better off if you're person A than if you're person B. If you do these healthy activities like meditation, reading, journaling, exercising, etc., you're better off than the guy who watches porn in order to cope with his problems. So you have to keep this in mind. You are not jealous of people that watch porn, but people who watch porn are jealous of you. If, for example, we look at another addiction like smoking here and we compare a smoker to a non-smoker, we can see that the smoker is always jealous of the non-smoker and wishes that he never started smoking in the first place. And then the non-smoker always feels a sense of relief that they never started smoking in the first place and that they don't have to deal with all the negative consequences that comes from having the addiction. I, for example, am a non-smoker, and whenever I see someone walking outside in the cold and rain, for example, really needing a cigarette, I always think to myself, well, I'm glad I don't need to do that, because that's just stupid. Because never ever in my life have I ever felt the desire to smoke in the first place. And the smokers, on the other hand, are always jealous of you and will always tell you that how they wish they never started in the first place and that they are very jealous of you in this case. And if you are a non-smoker and you have never smoked before in your life, you can probably relate to this story here. So now that means that all you need to do here is view porn addiction in the exact same way here. Because what you have to understand is that there are people in this world who don't watch porn or who have successfully quit porn and who are looking at you right now with a lot of pity because they think to themselves, well, I feel very sorry for him and I'm glad that I don't need to do what he's doing right now. Person A is feeling sorry for you here and doesn't understand why you need to watch porn. So now it's time for you to be person A yourself. Remember that porn doesn't help you cope with tough situations or solve any problems for you. Instead, it only makes the situation worse and it only adds new problems to the already existing ones. By quitting porn, you're not giving up anything valuable. Instead, all you're doing is gaining lots of great things and also gaining the opportunity to finally develop healthy coping mechanisms in your life to finally tackle these problems and actually fix them right now. If you quit, they are jealous of you and you're not jealous of them. Then the next part of the brainwashing, which we're going to dismantle, is the belief that the downsides of porn are not that bad. Because right now you might be thinking to yourself that, porn isn't giving you any real pleasure or helping you cope with situations, but at least you're still convinced that, the downsides aren't that bad and at least you're still able to get this high in your life every now and then. So the big monster believes that when you quit porn, you're still missing out on something valuable, which means that it will still give you these fearful thoughts to prevent you from quitting. But of course, this belief, just like the other ones, is false, and now I'm going to explain to you why this is. Now, you're probably already aware of all the downsides that porn can bring you, which are things I already mentioned at the start of this video, like erectile dysfunction, increased anxiety, and having worse relationships with women, for example. But the thing is that just having this knowledge of these downsides is not really enough. Because eventually what will happen is that the big monster will just debunk all of these downsides. Because it's just going to say things like, I'm not planning to have sex anytime soon anyway. So erectile dysfunction doesn't really matter right now. Or, increased anxiety doesn't really matter right now because I could live with a little more anxiety. And it's also bad without porn, And, having worse relationships, it's not like my relationships are getting completely ruined anyway. So it's not as bad as you think it is. And at least I'm having something to look forward to right now. So what's basically happening here is that you're downplaying the downsides that porn brings you, and there's still some benefit to it that you believe is very valuable and still outweighs all of the downsides combined together. And therefore, you convince yourself that it's good to continue to watch porn. So now we're going to look at how we can dismantle this belief. And to do that, I'm going to show you another graph here, which is a graph that displays the quality of your life over time and to see how porn actually affects the quality of your life. What you can see here is that when you had your first session, life was actually very good. Your mental health, your relationships, and the quality of your erection were all at a high level, which means that the quality of your life was relatively good. But when we fast forward 600 sessions later, we can see that things have gotten a lot worse for you. Now, when you look at this big decrease in the quality of your life, you would probably say that this is enough motivation for you to quit watching. But the tricky thing here is that all of this happened very gradually, because in between the first session and maybe like the 600 session, that would be like 5 years of time, for example. And don't take all the numbers too literally here, guys, because I'm just using these to illustrate my point here. So there's basically a lot of time in between your first and your last session, and because of that, it happened very gradually. The line went down very gradually, and maybe so gradually that you haven't even noticed these changes in your quality of life over time. So for you, it might not even feel right now that your life has gotten way worse because of watching porn. Maybe because you've been addicted for such a long time now in your life, you can't even properly remember anymore what your life felt like before you got addicted. So basically, the way of living that you have right now has just become your new normal way of living. And because you haven't really experienced any severe consequences like immediately in your life, like suddenly losing your job or getting into any legal troubles, for example, you're simply not concerned enough about the downsides that porn gives you in order to fully convince you to quit. But the thing is that when you combine all of these downsides together and look at the negative impact that it had on your life, it is actually way bigger than you think it is, and it's definitely something that shouldn't be underestimated here. And this is also good news, because that means that if you quit porn, you're also able to like reverse engineer this process, and you're able to gain all these huge benefits in your life again. And then last of all, when we take a look back at the weighing scale where we compare the downsides of watching porn to the benefits of watching porn, at least I hope that by now you're convinced that the downsides are in fact heavier than the benefits. But moreover, I hope you're also convinced by now that there aren't even any benefits to watching porn, because I already explained to you that it doesn't help you cope with things and that it doesn't provide you with any real pleasure in the first place. So that should make things even easier, because we can just take the benefits out of the picture altogether, and then it should just be a no-brainer, and that is, you should just quit watching porn. If you truly want to be free, you have to recognize that the downsides of porn are real and that they shouldn't be underestimated. By quitting, you actually free yourself from a harmful cycle and you gain lots of great benefits in your life. You're basically taking back what was already yours, but simply taken away by watching porn. And what will you miss out by quitting? Absolutely nothing. Moving on to the next part of the brainwashing is the belief that porn is normal and acceptable. Now, this belief comes from the idea that so many people in this world watch porn that it can't be that bad for you, right? You know, there's so many successful people who also watch it, so there must be some benefit to it, right? And also, unlike some of the hard drugs in this world, porn is not forbidden. So if porn were that bad, then why is it not forbidden, just like these things? So when you try to quit, the big monster will use this reasoning to create a feeling of fear inside of you again, and therefore keep you stuck in the cycle of addiction. However, this belief is once again, you've guessed it, false too, and I'll explain why. First of all, the idea that everyone watches porn is actually not true. Like I mentioned before in the video, there are a few people in this world who don't watch porn, either because they are religious or because they never got into the addiction, or they live in a country where porn isn't available for them, or maybe they're like me, where they were addicted in the past, but eventually they were able to successfully quit. Now, of course, I'm not stupid, and I do know that a majority of people in this world are still porn users, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy activity to do in your life. Because just like porn, there's also these other things like smoking cigarettes, scrolling on social media, and eating junk food that a majority of the people in this world do as well. And we all know by now that these things aren't good for us as well. So what you need to do is look at porn in the same way here by realizing that despite the fact that a majority of people do watch it, doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't any negative consequences here for your mental and physical health. What you could ask yourself, for example, is if everyone jumped off a bridge, would I do it too? Probably not. And now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Cappie, I get that, but if porn is so bad for you as you say it is, then why is it not forbidden and why is it so easily accessible? And to answer that question, I can use the exact same reasoning here. Because just because something is very widely and easily accessible in your life, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy activity to do, because it's very unhealthy, of course. And also, just because something is widely accepted right now, doesn't mean it will stay that way forever, of course. Because when we look again at smoking, we can see that 20 years ago, it was very easy to get a cigarette and you could smoke literally everywhere. But now 20 years later, we can see that it's very hard to get a cigarette right now, or at least it's way harder than it used to be because there's no advertisements for it anymore. You're not allowed to smoke in public places anymore, so it's way more harder right now. And I believe that the same is probably gonna happen to porn in the future as well, because what you have to understand is that high-speed internet porn is still relatively new in today's day and age, and there's still a lot of research being done about this. Because unlike cigarettes, where there's already been a lot of research done about it, which resulted in all these restrictions and stuff like that, with porn that isn't the case right now. But I do think that it can happen in the future as well. But the great thing about this is that you don't have to wait for there to be restrictions against porn, because you can decide to take matters in your own hand right now and just quit today instead of waiting for all these things. Remember that you never have to base your decision on what the majority of people in this world are doing, because all that matters is what's healthy and beneficial for you. Unfortunately, we live in a world where addictive substances are very easily accessible and not forbidden, but that means that you need to take matters into your own hand here. So by recognizing that normal and accessible doesn't necessarily mean healthy and good, you can finally make a decision based on what's best for you. And that is, of course, to never watch porn again. Then moving on to the next false belief here, we have the belief that porn improves your sex life. Now, this comes from the idea that porn is able to serve as an educational tool that can help you to become better at sex and therefore improve your sex life. So whenever you try to quit, the big monster will tell you that you're missing out on this benefit and that you shouldn't quit. So it keeps you stuck in the cycle of addiction. And once again, this is a false belief. And not only is this a false belief, but porn actually makes your sex life worse. And let me explain that. First, what you have to understand is that when you watch porn, what you're looking at is a very unrealistic portrayed image of what sex is actually like. There's all these things like optimized camera angles, optimized lighting, unrealistic body standards and sexual acts, and all the staging and scripting that is done to create these videos. And when you consistently watch videos like these, what you're basically doing is teaching yourself that this is what sex is like and that you need to match these standards. But then whenever you finally have sex yourself in real life, you're probably gonna get very frustrated and confused because you start realizing that the image that was portrayed by porn is very different from what real sex is actually like. Because you might start asking yourself these things like, why does her body look so different? And why do I get so tired? And this is not what I expected. And because of these things, you can gain all these insecurities. You might get things like performance anxiety, or you might have trouble getting it up and you get erectile dysfunction, so to say. And besides that, when we take a look at the most important aspects of real life sex, which are things like communication and consent and emotional connection, porn doesn't actually cover any of these things at all. So not only is it a bad teacher for teaching you the wrong things, it's also a bad teacher because it fails to teach you the right things. And now you might think to yourself, well, Cappie, I get that, but what if I watch the more like vanilla porn in this case? Wouldn't I be able to educate myself without desensitizing my brain here? Because wouldn't that portray a more realistic image of actual sex? And well, the truth here is that even vanilla porn is not portraying a realistic image of sex. Because what you have to understand is that even though vanilla porn is not as exaggerated as the like non-vanilla porn, it's still scripted and inauthentic. Because there's still actors who are doing things according to a script and they're still doing things that aren't spontaneous, which is what real sex is actually like. And also what you have to understand here is that when you're looking at porn, you're looking at other people having sex from a third person point of view, instead of having this first person point of view, which is what you have when you're actually having sex. So what happens is that when you compare porn to actual sex, you're not engaged in all the sensations and all the emotions and all the intimacy when you watch porn compared to having actual sex. So whenever you're having actual sex, what happens is that you're probably caught by surprise. You don't really know what to do, which means that you still have to learn how to do it anyway. So porn didn't really help you here. If, for example, you're trying to learn how to drive a car because you're trying to get your license, you might look at like all these videos of other people driving a car and learn about what all the pedals are for example. But then eventually, whenever you have to drive a car yourself, the experience is once again completely new and you still have to learn it yourself. And now you might be thinking, well, yes, Cappie, I know that in order to learn something, I have to do it myself as well, instead of just watching videos of other people do it. But all I want is to just have an example to look at, so I don't just go completely blank into the experience here. And well, I do understand that, guys, but to be honest, if you have knowledge about the common positions and the common sexual acts, and you know where to find the right hole, then you will be fine. Because the rest is all up to spontaneity and personal experience, which can only be experienced when you're having sex yourself. So always keep in mind that porn is not beneficial for your sex life, but instead it's making your sex life worse. If you quit porn, you'll be able to get aroused more easily again. You'll be able to enjoy sex to the fullest again without being frustrated and confused. So whenever the big monster tries to convince you that porn is somehow beneficial for your sex life, you can tell it to go himself. Then moving on to the next part of the brainwashing, we have the belief that having an orgasm is necessary in order to manage libido and sexual frustration. Now, the big monster believes that when you stop watching porn, you will have so many sexual thoughts and you will be so horny all the time that you won't be able to focus on anything else. So it will use this reasoning to convince you that continuing to watch porn is the right thing to do here. However, this belief is of course also false, and once again, I'll explain why for you here. First of all, it's important to understand that whenever you have like a lot of sexual thoughts all the time and you feel horny all the time, that's actually a result of watching porn. And so if you watch a lot of porn, your brain became like used to having an unnatural level of stimulation, which is why you have these thoughts all the time. And that's actually the thing that's hard to manage here. So this is actually once again a case of you believing that porn and releasing is the solution to a problem, while it's actually the cause of the problem. Because once again, there's a lot of people in this world as well who don't watch porn and they just have a natural libido. They don't always think about sex, they only think about it every now and then, but for them it's actually very easily manageable. Personally, I haven't watched porn or masturbated for almost over 2 years now, and I don't feel any of these intense cravings and urges right now anymore. It's because I quit watching porn, I quit masturbating, and therefore my libido returned to its normal state, and then it became very easily manageable for me. Because first of all, what happens if you don't release all the time is that your body will naturally release for you through these things called nocturnal emissions, which are also known as wet dreams. And these are basically a way for your body to maintain balance for you without you needing to do anything about it. And furthermore, there are actually more ways to express sexual energy instead of releasing all the time. Because by doing things like meditation, working out, and working on a project, for example, you're able to channel all these excess energy that you're feeling into those things, and therefore you will be able to become more calm and relaxed as well. And not only do these activities help you with controlling your urges, but they also provide you with numerous health benefits as well. Whereas with watching porn, you're only gaining downsides in terms of your health and you're actually getting more urges instead. But what I do have to mention though is that right after you quit watching porn, there will be this short period in your life where you actually feel more sexual tension compared to when you were still watching porn. And this can be a little bit uncomfortable. But what you need to understand here is that these symptoms are only temporary and they are nothing that you need to worry about. This is your body's way of recalibrating and to make sure that you are returning to your natural state of being here. So your body is very smart, so you can trust that it's doing the right thing here, even if it doesn't feel like that at the time. Something that can help you get through this period more easily is by reminding yourself that the benefits that you gain from quitting far outweigh the downsides that you have of still watching. So this can be a very motivating factor for you at that time. So each time you feel the need to watch porn in order to get rid of any like excess sexual energy or any sexual frustration that you're having, you have to keep in mind that this is just another trick of the monsters to try and keep you hooked into the addiction. By quitting porn, you are not giving up on anything, but instead you're finally giving yourself the opportunity for your body to return to its natural state of being, where you have the power to pick healthier alternatives in order to manage any sexual tension that you feel at the time. And then we arrive at the last part of the brainwashing, which we're going to dismantle, which is the belief that porn use can be moderated or controlled. Now, this involves the idea that if you are able to watch porn like only every now and then, you won't suffer as much from the downsides as much, and therefore you are still able to get this high every now and then and still enjoy this high every now and then. So whenever you try to quit, the big monster will use this reasoning and tell you these things like, oh, if you just watch it every now and then, the downsides won't be as bad. And then you still have this high, which is pleasurable for you. So, of course, this one is false too. So let's dismantle this last one as well. So the first thing you need to understand about the downsides of watching porn is that whether you are a heavy addict that watches every day or a casual user that only watches every now and then, you are still addicted in both scenarios. And what that means is that in both scenarios, you still suffer from the downsides of having the little monster and the big monster inside of you. There will still be these physical cravings from the little monster all the time, trying to convince you to watch again. There will also be these mental cravings and these arguments inside of your head of the big monster all the time. So even if you only watch porn every now and then, you keep these monsters alive because you keep feeding them all the time. And what you need to understand as well is that whenever you're trying to play this game with the little and the big monster, where like on the first day you're gonna say no to the monster's cravings, and then after a couple of days you say yes to the cravings, and you constantly have to negotiate when you can watch and how many times you can watch, for example. Like when you're playing that game, it's a very dangerous game. Because what you're doing here is creating a lot of mental struggle. Because right now when you're doing this, it becomes very overwhelming and mentally confusing, like constantly having to negotiate with these monsters all the time about when and how many times you can watch. It always makes sure that porn stays at the center of your thoughts, even when you're not actively watching it, which can be a very exhausting process here. And because this mental struggle can be so tiring and overwhelming when you try to keep up with it all the time, and the monsters will start screaming louder and louder to you that you need to start watching porn again, then eventually you will be at a time where you are so exhausted and your HP is so much depleted that you won't be able to give in to these urges anymore. And there's a very high chance then that you're going to end up in this binge watch session where you just relapse a lot of times, because right now what you're basically doing is trying to hold your breath for a long time underwater, and then finally when you're able to get back up again, you start gasping for air even more desperately because you've been trying to hold your breath for such a very long time. So the truth here is that the only way to get rid of the addiction completely and permanently is to starve these monsters to death. And you need to keep them that way. And the only way to do that is by quitting porn and never watch again. Remember that by quitting porn, you're not giving up on anything valuable. Instead, all you're doing is freeing yourself from a harmful cycle. And you're gaining a lot of great things. So now that we have finally dismantled all of the false beliefs that were part of the brainwashing of the big monster, we can finally look at what life will look like after porn. Because right now, I can imagine that you still have a couple of questions here, which are something like, what will life be like after I quit? And will I experience any withdrawal symptoms? Will I feel deprived because there's something missing? Or what will I do now instead of watching porn? Now, it's normal to still have questions like these even at this point of the video, because right now this is the last part of your addicted brain that's still trying to give you this fear and tries to keep you stuck into the addiction. But once again, there is nothing to worry about here, because when you quit porn, there's nothing you need to fear and everything to gain. So let's look at why that is. First of all, let's start with the fact here that at this point in the video, you have successfully killed the big monster, which means that you were able to get rid of all these mental cravings and all these arguments inside of your head, which is a very good thing, because that means that right now, all you need to still beat at this stage is the little monster here, which are, of course, the physical cravings, like the dopamine cravings I mentioned before. And the thing with the little monster is that it's not very intimidating, actually, because all that it's giving off is a very slight discomfort. It's just this slight feeling of emptiness inside of your chest or stomach that wants to have dopamine. But the thing is that when you're having this feeling inside of you, it's actually a very good sign, because it means that right now your body is returning to its natural state of being and that your body is actually healing because of that. So when you look at it this way, it can actually become very easy to deal with these cravings. If, for example, you were to have a mosquito bite and the spot starts itching, you could, for example, see that itching as like the little monster that is giving you this physical craving. It's like signaling to your brain that you need to do something about it, which is the itchy feeling. And then there's, of course, two things that can happen. First of all, there's option one, where you start to panic and you start to think to yourself, I need to scratch this itch or else. And the reason why you think that is because there's also a big monster that has the belief that scratching will solve the problem. So then what happens next is that you start scratching it very desperately. And then after that, the itching comes back even worse and the spot grows even bigger, for example. But then, of course, there's also option two, where you actually understand how the itching works and that the itching won't solve the problem. And you can tell yourself it's only temporary and a sign of healing. Because the reason why you think that is because you successfully killed the big monster. You don't believe anymore that scratching will solve the problem. This is what happens a lot of time when you're very young, for example, and you don't know yet how a mosquito bite works. But then when you grow older and you start learning about how it works, you start to be more calm. Then whenever you get a mosquito bite, you're like, this is going to be fine. If I don't scratch the itch, it will go away eventually. And that's exactly what happens, because then when you don't scratch the itch and you stay calm, eventually the itching and the spot itself will go away. And with porn, of course, this works in the exact same way, because what we did in the previous section of this video is remove all the brainwashing and all the false beliefs that you had about porn. So right now, you probably don't believe that there are any benefits to porn anymore, which is why whenever you get these dopamine cravings, you are able to stay calm. You can think to yourself, this is just what happens after quitting porn. My body is returning to its natural state of being, which is a good sign. And all I need to do is just not watch porn anymore, because then I will starve the little monster as well and the cravings will go away. You gotta understand that when you quit porn, the largest part of the pain that you're feeling is the mental cravings of the big monster. And once you take these away, there's only the slight physical cravings of the little monster. And like I just explained, these are very easy to deal with, of course, because they're very slight and temporary. And something that really helped me at this stage of quitting is whenever I had this like dopamine craving inside of my body, I would think to myself, yes, the little monster is dying and this is a good sign. And I basically turned it into this little game where I thought that each time I would get a craving, I would see this as dealing a little bit more damage to the little monster here. So in that way, you can give a positive spin to having these cravings and you can stay more calm and relaxed when trying to quit. So bringing back the question, will I experience withdrawal symptoms? The answer to that is yes, but they are very mild and they go away very quickly. And then the second question, will I feel deprived because there's something missing? The answer is a very clear no. Look, I get it, guys. Letting go of something can be very difficult here, even if you know that that thing was very bad for you and not serving you in any way. Because what happens when you let go of something is you leave behind a void, and sometimes you don't really know what to do with that. And the reason for that is because your brain is used to familiarity. And whether you like going to the gym, for example, so like a healthy activity, or you're used to watching porn, which is of course not a healthy activity, then your brain will want both of these things in your life because it's used to familiarity and it doesn't really care about whether that's a good or a bad thing. I remember there was this story about a prisoner that was in prison for like a very large part of his life. And then whenever he got out of prison, he deliberately did something again in order to get back into prison again. And when you hear this story, it sounds crazy, of course, but looking at the example I gave you before, it actually sounds very reasonable because the prison was a familiar situation to this man. And then when he got out of prison, it was very unfamiliar and scary to him. And the exact same thing happens when you quit porn, because while you intellectually know that it's the right thing to do and that it's not benefiting your life in any way, you still might have these thoughts where you're like, shit, I actually have to quit now and life will never be the same anymore. And to be honest, you're right about that. Life will never be the same anymore. But the great thing is that the thing that you're missing out on was holding no value at all. But instead, by quitting, you're gaining a lot of great things and you're freeing yourself from a harmful cycle. So bringing back the question, what should I do instead of watching porn? Whatever the hell you want to do, guys. Now is the time to finally invest in yourself, pursue your dreams, and develop healthy coping mechanisms in order to deal with tough situations in your life. Now is the time to finally do these things where you never had the time or energy for, and finally live your life to the fullest, guys. And I know that this sounds a little bit new to your brain, which means that it can be scary and intimidating, despite knowing that these things are very good for you. But remind yourself that whenever you have this fear of the unknown inside of you, it's just the last trick of your brain to try and keep you stuck in the addiction, and you don't have to take that feeling seriously. Always remember that it's always better to get out of prison instead of staying stuck in prison. So will you feel deprived because there's something now missing in your life? Something missing? Yes. Deprived? Absolutely not. So now that we've been able to get rid of the last sliver of doubt that you still had inside of you about quitting porn, we now arrive at the so-called moment of revelation. And this is a very, very nice experience because at this stage you feel a lot of joy and you feel very happy inside of you because now you realize that you are 100% certain that you're never gonna come back to the addiction ever again. Like right now you might be thinking to yourself, Cappie, you don't need to say anything else anymore. I can see it also clearly now. I can finally see through the illusion and it's like a fog that was always there has finally fallen for me. And you might even be wondering here, what did you just do to me here? And well, all I did here is I gave you the easy peasy way to quit porn. Because while the YouTube methods, which I mentioned at the start of this video, focus on increasing your HP by learning about the downsides of the addiction and by increasing your willpower and discipline, for example, you focus on increasing your HP and you focus on making sure that you are able to last longer in the battle against the big monster. But of course, these methods don't work because the battle against the big monster is infinite and eventually you will be exhausted, your HP will be depleted and you will eventually lose. But by using the easy peasy way, we went the other way around by instead of creating more reasons to stop watching, we took away all the reasons to keep watching. Therefore, the big monster is now fully killed and there is no battle anymore at all. And what better way is there to win a fight than to make sure that there is no fight at all in the first place? So the feeling of joy that you're experiencing right now is because the big monster is finally fully killed. And if you made it to this part of this video, I just want to say that I'm very proud of you guys. Because by doing this and taking the time to watch this video in the order that it was put in, you are taking responsibility for your own well-being. You're finally able to get rid of this awful addiction once and for all. However, guys, if right now you're not in the spot where you have this moment of revelation and you still have this sliver of doubt inside of you about quitting porn, so maybe you still believe that there is some benefit to it to still watch, then that means that the big monster is still alive and we still need to kill it here. Because if there's even one tiny little bit of sliver of doubt still inside of your head, there will be eventually a battle inside of your head against the big monster, and then eventually you will probably relapse again. So if right now you're in this spot, there are two things which you can do. The first one is to watch the video again, because maybe you weren't really focused on the video, or maybe you skipped through the chapters, for example, and you weren't able to fully grasp all of the content of this video. And then maybe a second watch will fix that problem for you. And then the second option is to read the book called The Easy Peasy Way to Quit Porn. Because when you read this book, you are able to get a more extensive and comprehensive version of this video. And it will probably give you more certainty to quit because it will cover the aspects of the brainwashing way more thoroughly. And also the great thing about this book is that it's available for free online in both PDF and audio formats. So I will link the book in the description down below. And also what I want to say as well is that even if you do right now experience this moment of revelation and you're fully convinced that the big monster is not there anymore, I still highly recommend you to still read the full book just to be sure that you will never get back into it again. And that brings us to the last part of the video where I'm going to give you a set of 10 instructions to follow. And as long as you follow these instructions and you keep reminding yourself of them for the rest of your life, you will be able to quit porn permanently and you will never return to the addiction ever again. So the instructions are as follows. Number 1, without porn, you are not missing out. There are lots of benefits and 0 downsides. Number 2, just one more time is a lie. You're either free or addicted. No in between. Number 3, life can still be tough without porn. Porn, however, doesn't fix this, but makes it worse. Number 4, you never enjoyed being a porn user and you never will be. That's why you quit. Number 5, you are not jealous of porn users. Porn users are jealous of you. Number 6, when you think about porn, don't panic, but say to yourself, yes, I am no longer a slave to porn and I pity those who are. Number 7, ignore all advice on quitting porn that conflicts with the easy peasy way. Number 8, don't wait to quit, do it now. Number 9, never doubt your decision to quit, you know it's the correct one. Number 10, enjoy your freedom. Now that brings us to the actual last part of the video here, guys, and don't worry, I'm gonna keep it short here, but there's just a couple of more things I need to mention. First, I need to mention that all of the credits of this video go to the author of The Easy Peasy Way to Quit Porn. Once again, please read the book, guys. It will change your life forever, even more than this video already did for you. And please also be sure to share this book with whoever you believe is still struggling with porn addiction, because sharing is caring, guys. And if after a while you realize that you've actually managed to quit porn using this video and the book, and you're able to stay away from it completely, then be sure to come back to this video and leave a comment down below saying something like, hey man, this advice actually helped me. This isn't a clickbait title or motivational nofap video, but I was finally able to get rid of the addiction. Because the reason why I want you to do this is because a lot of people will come to this video feeling very doubtful whether this video is worth their time, like whether it's actually gonna help them or not. And when they read a comment like yours, it might convince them to keep watching and give the video a chance. And then maybe they'll eventually get rid of the addiction too, and they are able to share it with more people. And then together we can make the world a better place. And I know that this might sound like a cheap little trick of me in order to get more views on this video, but believe me when I say that it isn't like that. I am genuinely convinced that this single method can potentially help thousands, maybe even millions of people around the world to finally get rid of this awful addiction. So that's why I want as many people to see this video. So for now, stop watching YouTube videos, take action on this advice by going to the link in the description and start reading The Easy Peasy Way to Quit Porn. Share it with as many people as possible, and most importantly, enjoy your freedom. Stop thinking, start doing. Take care.